Hi guys. Tonight I'm trying to read this book, P.D. Ouspensky, In Search of the Miraculous. The noted author of Tertium Organum combines the logic of a mathematician with the vision of a mystic in his quest for the solutions to the problems of man and the universe. So let's see. Fragments from an unknown teaching. Okay, table of contents are very detailed. Let's see how far we get. I returned to Russia in November 1914. That is, at the beginning of the First World War, after a rather long journey through Egypt, Ceylon, and India. The war had found me in Colombo, and from there I went back through England. When leaving Petersburg at the start of my journey, I had said that I was going to seek the miraculous. The miraculous is very difficult to define. But for me, this world had quite a definite meaning. I had come to the conclusion a long time ago that there was no escape from the labyrinth of contradiction in which we live, except by an entirely new road, unlike anything hitherto known or used by us. But where this new or forgotten road began, I was unable to say. I already knew then, as an undoubted fact, that beyond the thin film of false reality, there existed another reality from which, for some reason, something separated us. The miraculous was a penetration into this unknown reality, and it seemed to me that the way to the unknown could be found in the East. Why in the East? It was difficult to answer this. In this idea there was perhaps something of romance, but it may have been absolutely real, perhaps a real conviction that in any case nothing could be found in Europe. On the return journey and during the several weeks I spent in London, everything I thought about the results of my search was thrown into confusion by the wild absurdity of the war and by all the emotions which filled the air, conversation, newspapers, and which, against my will, often affected me. But when I returned to Russia and again experienced all those thoughts with which I had gone away, I felt that my search and everything connected with it was more important than anything that was happening or could happen in a world of obvious absurdities. I said to myself, then, that the war must be looked upon as one of those generally catastrophic. Hang on, let me make sure I'm on the right page here. That the war must be looked upon as one of those generally catastrophic conditions of life, in the midst of which we have to live and work and seek answers to our questions and doubts. The war, the great European war, in the possibility of which I had not wanted to believe, and the reality of which I did not for a long time wish to acknowledge, had become a fact. We were in it, and I saw that it must be taken as a great memento mori, showing that hurry was necessary and that it was impossible to believe in life which led nowhere. The war could not touch me personally, at any rate not until the final catastrophe which seemed to be inevitable for Russia, and perhaps for the whole of Europe, but not yet imminent. Though then, of course, the approaching catastrophe looked only temporary, and no one had as yet conceived of all the disintegration and destruction, both inner and outer, in which we should have to live in the future. Summing up the total of my impressions in the East, and particularly of India, I had to admit that on my return my problems seemed even more difficult and complicated than on my departure. India and the East had not only lost their glamour of the miraculous, on the contrary, this glamour had acquired new shades that were absent from it before. I saw clearly that something could be found there which had long since ceased to exist in Europe, and I considered that the direction I had taken was the right one. But at the same time, I was convinced that the secret was better and more deeply hidden than I could previously have supposed. When I went away, I already knew I was going to look for a school or schools. I had arrived at this long ago. I realized that the personal, individual efforts were insufficient, and that it was necessary to come into touch with the real and living thought which must be in existence somewhere, but with which we had lost contact. This I understood, but the idea of schools itself changed very much during my travels, and one way or another became simpler and more concrete, and another way became more cold and distant. I want to say that schools lost much of their fairy tale character. Excuse me. On my departure, I still admitted much that was fantastic in relation to schools. Admitted is perhaps too strong a word. I should say better that I dreamed about the possibility of a non-physical contact with schools, a contact, so to speak, on another plane. I could not explain it clearly, but it seemed to me that even at the beginning of a contact with a school may have had a miraculous nature. I imagined, for example, the possibility of making contact with schools of the distant past, with schools of Pythagoras, with schools of Egypt, with schools of those who built Notre Dame, and so on. It seemed to me that the barriers of time and space should disappear on making such contact. The idea of schools in itself was fantastic, and nothing seemed to me too fantastic in relation to the idea. And I saw no contradiction between those ideas